Hey everyone, I'm here with Officer Scott Cotterman. Is that correct? Did I say it right?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Well, I'd love for you to give a little intro about yourself, a little background, and we can go from there.
I've been a policeman, sworn policeman, for 24 plus years in the state of Ohio. I worked at the federal level, city level, county level, and started out small, like many officers do, at a smaller agency and work your way up. I'm at a city level now, where I work with a bigger government than maybe some agencies, but that's where I've spent my career.
Great. And do you find there's actually been a difference in terms of going from kind of, like you said, you started off on a smaller level and now you're working on a much bigger level. Is there a noticeable change in terms of how policing is done?
Oh, sure, sure. The policing is, I mean, the core values are the same. The policies and procedures change. The amount of call intensive versus a smaller agency where used to smaller calls where you get overwhelmed when you get to a bigger city. So yes, the job itself hasn't changed because, as we know, you can be in a one town or one cop town and be killed in this job, or you can be in 10 million and unfortunately lose your life. So the risks are the same. I think they're just a little greater, and the responsibility is greater as you get to a bigger agency. And that's something I noticed, that there's a lot more paperwork, obviously, as you get through the ranks to maybe a larger agency than when you started. So those are the only changes that I've seen. There's a lot more politics, obviously, when you move up to. Doesn't mean there's not. It's small cities, but it's a bigger deal when you get up to bigger agencies where there's a lot more politics.
Have you noticed a huge change in terms of the rhetoric? I mean, every officer I talk to kind of does notice this, but in terms of, let's say 10 years ago, you've been in it so long, 10 years ago to today, how like citizens see you, and then just the general atmosphere around police.
Yeah, when I've actually got 28 years, but 4 of those years I was just an auxiliary, so I was trying to find my path. So those years don't count to me because I didn't quite understand the job. But as I got full time and sworn, where you understand the job, it has changed. It's changed dramatically, because when I was a kid, the things that are done to me now as a policeman, I never dreamt of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that disrespect and lack of what's a nice word to say it, lack of respect for authority really is pretty much shown in today's youth. I hate to say it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way they were raised. You live in a lot of broken homes, which I too came from a broken home, lost my father when I was young. So I know what it's like to have two paths. One you can go awry, and the other one you can follow the straight and narrow and try to make something yourself and do something in society. And a lot of kids are given a free pass because they are minors, and that's the whole idea of being a juvenile, is to make mistakes, learn from them, so that when you become an adult, you are a productive member of society. And that's kind of lost. And with that comes the rhetoric, like you were saying, where it's an anti-police. It doesn't matter if it happened 100 years ago, it's still the police's fault.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things that have really shown me in the last 10 years. I used to tell people that I love this job from the bottom of my heart. I wouldn't do anything else. But as I go now, I don't know that I feel the same way that I would recommend. I have kids, friends of mine whose kids are going through the academy, and they've retired or close to retirement like I am, and they're of the same mentality. It's not the same job. It really is not. And that's alarming, because the line in the sand between civility and chaos is us. And if people don't respect us, then there's nothing that's stopping us from turning this into Armageddon, kind of speak. And I don't mean that to be over dramatic. I just mean, if it's a lawless society, anything can happen. And without the protection of police standing in the way of that, you are no longer free to walk to the store, go to the mall, get on the highway.
We see that. We see it
Like,
happening. We see it happening
and
right now. There's anarchy in New York. How many people were just shot over the weekend?
and you're absolutely right. It's becoming sad, because the very people, and I don't want to call them hypocrisy, but the hypocrites that chastise the police are the first ones to call them when there's a problem. And there's all kinds of memes going around, some of them funny, some of them cruel, that kind of correlate with what it would really be like to defund the police. It sounds great, but I remember an episode of Family Guy or memes that are going around where people said, guns and violence are nasty. We don't need any of that. So let's burn the guns. And then the town is overwhelmed with monsters, and they say, go get the guns. And we'll say, well, we burned them all. So people want to get rid of that, defund the police, demilitarize the police, and do all those things. But the minute the what hits the fan, who are they going to call? There's no one. So if you get rid of the police, your kids are no longer safe, because the community that I work in, the city that I work in, the county I live in, that's where my kids go to school. That's where my friends' kids go to school. It's where my parents live. That's where I go shop. That's where we go out to dinner. And the reason that we want that community safe is for that. It's our sworn duty, but it's also where we reside. And people don't take that into consideration. I don't think people understand the perspective of what police are really trying to do. And there's a good group of videos going around now that don't kind of show officers in different perspectives and say, I'm not your enemy, and I'm not. And people think that we are. And when you interview people and talk to them, they really believe that thousands of people are being killed every day or around the country by law enforcement, when really the numbers are terribly short of that.
Yes,
It's more like,
I've talked about it. Yeah.
yeah, it's more like hundreds of officers are being killed every year. And unfortunately, in the scope of this job, there's going to be officers killed and hurt. There's going to be citizens killed and hurt that try to do harm to another citizen or an officer. But the lesser, the better. I mean, nobody wakes up each day hoping they get into a deadly force situation and certainly take someone's life. But at the end of the day, those officers want to go home to those families and their wives and kids, just like anybody else does. So we're tasked to do a job that's not always pretty. It doesn't always pay well. The benefits are okay, but it does not come with any glamour or glory, that's for sure. And we all knew that signing up. But to answer your question, these last 2 or 3 years have probably been the worst that I've ever seen it. And I'm 49 years old, so.
Yeah, a lot of police are stepping down. A lot of police are walking away. I've spoken to a ton of police, and they're just like, why would I keep doing this? And you see less people going into the police force. It's scary. And again, I think you make a valid point in terms of there's just anarchy without police. But I personally have my own theories. I think there are people who want to destabilize the country. I think if you look at the rhetoric, you look at the media. I just did a deep dive into how the news is reporting crimes, and the results I found were shocking. Just if you type black person, white person, if you just search those search terms, you would think that police are out killing people every day. Every single result when you type in white person is white cop kills unarmed black man. I didn't even mention anything about police. I didn't mention anything about shootings. I just typed white person. You would think it would be something about, random white person walks down to whatever the news. And then you type in black person, nothing about achievement, nothing positive, all black person killed by white man. What black person killed by, lynched. It's just very negative. And you're like, well, if people are inundated with this, it's not a shock that they believe things you're talking about.
Right. I've seen those interviews where people really were on the spot interviewed and asked that question, and they think that hundreds of people are killed every year, that we're slaughtering black individuals on the roadways in every city USA, and that is absolutely just not the case. It's non-factual information that's being treated, retweeted, reposted, re-Instagrammed, and whatever other social media is out there, and people think it's happening when they could be 5, 6, 7-year-old stories that are getting reposted, and the videos are getting relinked, and it looks to people like these things are happening again, and they're the old stories. And it's sad that perspective is really messing with people's psyche to buy into that.
Yeah, it's very hard for people also to separate a tragic event from the whole. I noticed that. You're right. There's videos that come up from, Tamir Rice, which was the kid, I believe he was 13 or 14, who was shot, 12 maybe. Very tragic. It happened very quickly. And so, but that happened years ago, and people are still pulling that. If it was happening every day, if it was on the scale that people believe it's on the scale of, you would see 100 Tamir Rices a year. You would see 1,000 Tamir Rices a year. But we're still referencing Tamir Rice from however many years ago because it was a tragedy, but also because it was anomalous. It is not happening all the time. And I wish people could understand that. They're ignoring the 870,000 police officers who are doing a good job and focusing on the few who are out there who screw up.
Correct. And you take those 870,000 police officers and you go, we work 6 and 2. Some guys work 10, 4 10s, but whatever it is, most officers work 40 hours a week. We work a 42-day cycle where we have 6 on, 2 off. But most officers work a 40, most of the time there's overtime as well. But take those 870 some sworn officers that are out on the street in every city USA, and you do the math of how many calls to service they have and how many interactions they have with white or black, it doesn't really matter, with citizens, and you take the mortality rate of those encounters, it's got to be so small
Hmm.
compared to the amount of, we in our city have maybe 50, 60,000 calls to service a year. So you take those 50 to 60,000 calls of service, that doesn't include the MC calls, which are the ones where you tell, hey, a guy to get off the road or get on the sidewalk or anything like that where you have encounters. These are actually logged encounters. And you look at how many of those involved use of force, how many of those involved a death or an injury, and it pales in comparison to the amount of officers that are killed every year. So if like you said, we were really out and we have these special meetings where we go out and want to kill people and we get together each morning and decide how that's going to happen, which is such a farce, then those numbers would be huge, because with 870,000 cops in the United States and its territories, give or take, those numbers would be in the thousands every year, maybe tens of thousands of people being killed at the hands of police. And that's just truly not the case. Those numbers are skewed intentionally for a different agenda. And I'm not so far, or I'm not so blind to not believe what you mentioned earlier, that it is maybe the left's angle to dismantle America.
Hmm.
We've already removed some of the very important things that you and I grew up on, which you can't say God in school, you can't have, God in prayer. We have God bless, in the back of our cruisers, which were one of the few places in Ohio that have just not abandoned that idea. You can't say the national anthem, you're offending somebody. So all those things that made America great, that everybody came over here on, those ideas of
Yep.
the rights of freedoms are now being taken away and people don't see it. They're being
Well,
challenged and taken away and people don't see it because it's going slow, little by little.
not so slow anymore. Our language is being
No,
taken away. I mean, I've been researching the changes to language. Twitter just released a whole new thing where they have inclusive language in their coding. In their coding, it doesn't make
correct.
any sense. I mean, you're now the whole thing with it's offensive to say expecting mother or to say that women have periods because according to the progressive left, men can have periods too.
The
Um,
LGBTQ, yeah,
yeah, it's
it's
all gone a little bit off
too
the
far.
wall loony. And I think again, because if you can deconstruct, if you can get rid of objective truth, you can destroy society. You see it
Well, that's exactly how you destroy from within. You don't need a nuclear bomb to have an Armageddon. You don't need a war on our soil to have Armageddon. 9/11 was something that unfortunately happened, and I was there with our Papa team. I did a lot of crisis stuff there. What I noticed there was something so horrible where thousands of people died, and it took such a tragedy like that to actually bring America back together, because it was an outside threat that attacked our soil, and that was just unacceptable. And I couldn't have imagined a better time when people were flying the flag, people were saluting the flag, people were proud of the flag. And now you look at people, they could win a basketball game or lose a basketball game. They burn the flag, they burn cruisers, they torch things, they torch their own neighborhoods, they riot. It's not peaceful rioting. It's not for a cause. It's just an excuse, in my opinion, to commit chaos under the guise of some sort of, my opinion, manufactured threat that doesn't exist. I don't know a single officer. I work with black, white, Indian, Hispanic, gay, LBGQ, everybody. And I don't know a single officer, nor have I ever heard a single officer from the federal level to the city level to the county level, has ever got together and said, let's go attack that individual because of his race, or let's go beat that person up because of his race, or kill them like they think we do. And it just doesn't exist. So if I'm just one person in that scale of 870,000 people, the percentage of people that are bad has to be in that 0.5%. So the other 99.5% officers in the country, they're doing a great job and dying for a total stranger. People need to understand that they are not the enemy. The police are there to help you. I will respond to help you, whatever color skin you are, whatever nationality, whatever identifier you have, whatever it is. And I don't want to hear that rhetoric about we abuse this and we abuse that. No, you're going to get the same help. If you need it, I'm going to risk my life or die trying to save you, just like I would a white person, a black person. It doesn't matter to me. But what I don't understand is people don't get that. People think that this thing's going on. And if you keep saying it does and bringing up discussions about it, no one ever shows me any data about the 37,000 calls you had last year. 1% of those complained, because we have a city a neutral city investigative board that investigates complaints and officer-involved shootings. And those are done independent by people from the police department. They're by law directors, citizens, council members, and community leaders, and they get together and they review these use of forces and determines whether there was officer error, a training error, and then that stuff goes heavily. I myself have been involved in 2 officer-involved shootings. I've been involved in 2 officer non-involved shootings where I was pinned down by a sniper. So I know what it's like to be stressed, and you got a split second to make a decision. And with a police officer in America, you got to be right every single time. If you're a bad guy, you only have to be right once, and that officer doesn't go home at night. And unfortunately, as you know, Toledo just lost an officer. You know, God bless his family in that department, but it's one of those things that in a split second in a crowded room with a bunch of people in this parking lot, someone shoots and kills him.
Yeah.
That would have probably been the least likely place that you thought someone would try to take an officer out. And here he is just going to I hate to say it's not routine because nothing is. Here he was just going to a routine drunk guy, 4th of July weekend. They probably handled hundreds of them like we have, of drunk people, obnoxious people causing disturbance. And he gets there and loses his life in front of hundreds of people. Now, many of them were scrambling and may not have seen the entire event, but possibly hundreds of people were there. So it can go from 0 to in a second in this job, and you got to make a split-second decision. And people don't understand that. Elon, I think what people misunderstand is the old adage, you got to walk a mile in a man's shoes, to understand it. I say walk a mile in a policeman's career. You go 25 years in my career, you're going to understand why some cops have a little bit of an ego, some cops are a little jaded, and they come out rough. And a lot of alcohol problems. There's a lot of PTSD problems. A lot of that comes from managing what they see every single day. You see people at their worst. You see the most gruesome crimes. You see the most destructive things you've ever seen in your life that you're not prepared for. And I've been doing this a long time. And there are times when I go, wow, I just was not expecting that. And I've seen just about everything. But this job reminds you on a regular basis that you haven't seen everything. So I've seen dead bodies, in the worst possible scenario. I've seen crimes in the worst possible fathom. And it does take a toll on you because you have to go home to your wife and kids and put that in a box. And you have to leave that box at work. You don't want to come home and kick the dog. You don't want to come home and fight with the wife. You don't want to come home and yell at the kids. But you are tore up. You are, stressed. And that's what our critical incident stress management is you are stressed because at the end of the day, you have kids, you have a wife, you have grandparents, and you see all these dead people in the end of your 25 career, and you see all these horrible, heinous crimes, and you see the aftermath. And that doesn't mean the firefighters and the emergency room people and coroners and things like that. They see them too. And one of the things that we talk about in our Northern Ohio critical incident stress management team is there's not just police and fire. There are the EMTs that were there. They are the dispatchers that have to talk to the victims right before they die, or the witness, right before they watch someone die. And then there's the emergency room workers that actually come in and try and treat them, and unfortunately, they pass. So every dead body that I see is going to affect me for the rest of my life. I don't think any person can imagine how much death and destruction and tragedy that a policeman sees. Now, there are good. I see people now being in this career as long as I have that are growing up and they've started kids themselves, and those kids are now doing well, and you see those kids that have made changes in their life for the good, maybe on drugs, maybe stealing, maybe on a bad path, maybe come from a broken home, and that's black or white. It doesn't matter what color. I interact with all of them, and you see those kids that are making progress. So I know that I can't save all those children. I know that I can't save them all, but I know that I can make a difference. And I think that's what every police officer wants to do, is go out and make a difference. And it's disheartening when you see America as a whole that does not have the full picture. It's like me judging NASA. I can't tell NASA what to do because I have no idea what it takes to put a man in space. Just like people that sit at home that are probably not working or have never worked in the field are making decisions based on rhetoric on TV and internet, which we all know you can't put anything on the internet. It's not true. But those people form opinions, and then they pass that opinion on, and before you know it, it becomes a community thing. Where I know a person that knew a person that knew a policeman that did this, and you're like, come on. Do you really know what goes on every day?
So I think the part of the issue is, and I've seen people say this, is that we in society give police what most people would call a high level of power over citizens. You have a gun, you have a badge, you can tell people what to do. And I think what they say is when there's an abuse of power of that, of that authority that we give to police, that it's unacceptable. And
Correct.
again, I think that they have trouble separating that abuse of power that happens within a minority of police officers from the majority who do a great job. In your perspective, I know you said some officers become jaded, some officers do get an ego. In all transparency, I've had experiences. I love the police, and I've had experiences where police officers did things that I was like, this is, unnecessary. They've clearly had a bad day. They've clearly had a run in or whatever it is that's escalated a situation. I understand. I'm going to defuse that situation in that case. Many people nowadays escalate it themselves because they don't feel like there's any reason to. And they don't realize that, like you said, the officer may have just seen a dead body and now he's pulling you over. He's not going to be in the best mood. But how do we deal with that? We don't have things in place, I feel right now, in the police force necessarily to really help mitigate that kind of situation where an officer does become jaded, has just seen a dead body, has just gone through all this, and now he has to keep going to do his job. And we have to not have a reactive police officer, let's say, in that case.
Yeah.
What do we do for that?
Well, I think with RHC in the state of Ohio, I'm really proud to say that with the FOP, which is the Fraternal Order of Police, that they are finally recognizing, just maybe like after World Wars, where soldiers came back and they weren't quite right, and they didn't want to recognize shell shock or PTSD. That was unknown language. It was taboo to say, and they'd pick it up, you big wuss, suck it up kind of thing. And really there are traumas. And what needs to be done and what's slowly starting to emerge is that people are realizing that there are traumas. And then, like you said, that officer could be pulling somebody over after they just pulled a dead kid out of a swimming pool and gave him CPR that was his son's age, and he didn't make it. So that officer, you got to understand, in a given day, and I'll just give an example. This is 24/7 now, it's just me, but I'll give an example. In one shift, just 2 days ago, there was a dead person, a shot person, I don't want to call it abduction, if you will, and all those emotions. It turned out that it wasn't abduction; it was just a dramatic thing. But all those emotions are just one day. Now, in the given of a course of a week or 6 days a week, like you said, that officer could have just seen 2 or 3 horrible tragedies, and you're expected to go on. I remember a few years ago, I pulled a guy out of a car when Narcan was just becoming. That's a whole other topic. I don't want to get off touch, but I remember pulling a guy out of a car and giving him CPR until the fire department got there because he was blue as can be, and he wasn't breathing. He was maybe at 1 to 2 beats a minute. He was knocking on death's door, and I remember giving him CPR until they got there. And I got back in the car and went on to the next call. And I remember one of the ladies pulled me aside that was there in the courthouse about a month later. She goes, "How do you do that? How do you have such a traumatic moment, switch it off, and then go about your day and be able to perform like you're asking me now?" And it's one of those things that come with experience. And unfortunately, not everybody does it. I golf. I have, I like to play outside sports, and I like to go out, and that's where I decompress. I like to listen to music, and I do dabble in coin collecting. So you got to have a hobby. Otherwise, you are going to be hitting the bottle and maybe be getting, into those domestics that you hear so much about to decompress. But we're just now starting to recognize with this critical incident stress management team where people can come to us and say, "Hey, listen, I'm not okay. I just saw 4 dead bodies this week, and one of them reminded me of my son, and I'm not dealing with it well. What do I do?" And that's where we can direct people to get help so that officer doesn't wait 25 years and along the way he becomes an alcoholic or becomes a jerk, and he's mean to his wife and kids, goes through a divorce, and his career and his life is ended. So all those things need to be addressed early on, and they weren't years ago, just like with soldiers. And I want to remind you that many of the men and women that work in law enforcement come from the battlefield to this job.
Yes, I know.
Tons of them. And they bring some of that with them. So they may already be a little bit jaded. They may already be a little bit emotional about things. So fireworks, things like that can set veterans off. We get lots of calls on on 4th of July that veterans have a hard time with that. So all of us are CIT trained, as well as many of the veterans that can come and relate to these people when we get calls like that, because there are stressors that can trigger things like that, especially with battle-ridden veterans. So there are things in place now that's recognizing departments, mayors and sheriffs and Congress is even investing time in it and looking into critical incident stress management as a mental health service for the police. So like you said earlier, we are just human beings, but they do hold us to a higher standard, and I get that. We are empowered with the unfortunate task of having to take someone's life using lethal force if you have to, and to take somebody's freedom if you have to arrest them. That is the most awesome power in the world, and it's scary as hell, I'll tell you that, because you got to be right every time. So knowing that, you got to respect the badge. And I know when I put that badge on that I not only work for that department, but I work for this profession as a whole, and I'm held to a higher standard. I can't be out writing OVI tickets if I'm out drinking and driving myself. I get that. So I know I got to be held both on and off duty. In the state of Ohio, you're never off duty. You're held to the same standard as a policeman on and off duty. So my conduct must be the same off duty as it is on duty, except I'm not, in the scope of my job. I just have to behave that way.
Yep.
So I know that I represent, and I don't want to disrepresent or shame all those officers that have died doing this job, that are going to die doing this job, or the officers that I work with doing this job around the world. I don't want to shame them by bad performance or doing something wrong. So that's what keeps me motivated and keeps me in perspective so that I don't become a bad apple. And what has always bothered me about bad apples is I just haven't seen enough of them to have a personal perspective. And some of those questions are standard on every FBI background. And what do you do if your partner is involved in a burglary and you see him steal a pair of underwear and he puts them in his pocket? What do you do? And the right thing to do is you tell him to put it back. And he puts it back before you walk out that store and ruin your life. Put it back. And if he doesn't, then you have a duty. You have an obligation that you're going to have to inform your supervisor that he just stole that. And unfortunately, those apples I've never run into. I know that question has come up. I know there's been stories of officers that have made poor decisions and stole from maybe a place they're working at or special duty. I just haven't seen any of that for me to have a perspective. So that's a good thing. The bad thing is I know it exists, but those guys do not represent this profession as a whole. It would be just as disrespectful and dishonorable for me to represent this department in a negative way as it would be for you to judge this whole profession in a negative way by those few individuals. So my goal, and after 9/11 and being on the PAPA team there and debriefing officers there after that horrible tragedy, my goal is with this critical incident stress management team is to reach out to those officers that have had a bad day. And before it gets out of control, before it goes to that domestic or goes to that citizen complaint or something like that, that they have a chance to come talk to me one-on-one or one of us one-on-one and are able to de-stress, or what we call, we call them one-on-ones. You can have group meetings, you can have large groups, but they're able to decompress and get that out of their system so that they can function and they can give everybody a fair shake, like you said, when they get pulled over without an attitude. I'll tell you the biggest thing I learned as a kid growing up, and again, it's a different generation. My dad was in the military, police, law enforcement family. One of the things I learned is that you were automatically respectful. I just never dreamt of saying F12 or running my mouth or holding the camera up to we didn't have phones back then, but holding the camera up to a cop and saying I'm not opening my window, and all those things. When really 99% of the time, I work STEP, which is a federal STEP grant that is traffic enforcement, especially on holiday weekends. I work that a lot. And a part of that goal is to change people's behavior. It's not to raise money, to write tickets and do all that stuff. It's to change people's behavior, because on those holiday weekends, when people do drink and there's heavy travel, those are when the worst things happen. So you're changing somebody's traffic behavior. You're changing them from making bad decisions before somebody gets hurt. It's being proactive, like you were saying earlier. Part of that is a warning. I don't have a problem giving somebody a warning. Constructive criticism is huge. I was a kid once. I know what it's like to feel the gas pedal. I know what it's like to rev your engine. So giving somebody a warning, and as long as they're courteous and honest and respectful, is not a problem. There's no officer that has a problem doing that. What'll get you in trouble is running your mouth and telling the officer all these names in the book, and what do you think is going to happen? You're probably going to walk away from with a ticket. You know what I'm saying? So those are the kind of things to take into consideration when you tell people, how do you behave? And I hear a lot of black parents have raised their kids to believe that they have to act different than someone else when they get pulled over. That's not true. I pull over black people all the time. And those black individuals I pull over, I conduct the stop the same way. The minute I realize that there's no threat, the minute I realize this guy just blew the red light, he was talking to his girlfriend on the phone or whatever, then the conduct can be cordial and nice. There is no big, bad, tough cop stuff. There is no rhetoric back and forth. I don't ever have that issue. And we have a predominantly Black community, just like many cities do. And I run into those people all the time, and they're just like anybody else, as long as you treat them the same way and they treat me the same way, we never have a problem. So there are a few individuals that like to instigate, that will drive by a car stop and run their mouth when you got someone pulled over. But that's just par for the course. I mean, we always, we have tough skin. We're not immune to feelings, but it's not new to us to be called names and stuff. So I think the answer to that is tell people that to be respectful, because that officer may have just come from the worst possible scenario you can imagine. And he has to process that. And then to give him grief on top of that might just be the catalyst that makes him say something or do something or be rude when it didn't need to happen that way. If you're respectful, there's a pretty good chance you're going to end up with a warning. And there's also a pretty good chance that nothing's going to come of that incident when both people are respectful to each other. So it is tough. It is almost difficult to understand for a citizen that officers are humans. I know we're bestowed with these awesome powers and we're bestowed with these awesome responsibilities, but what comes with that is great stress, because there isn't a single officer, including myself, that ever wakes up one day and hopes that he gets in a lethal encounter. Deadly force is the last. I teach CCW to citizens. It is the last resort, and it is not just something that we do every day. It's not willy-nilly. It's just such a farce for me, and it's hard to process for me that people actually think that. And what's really even more bizarre in a scenario like that is that we are sworn that if I engage you and we end up fighting for my life, I've wrestled knives out of people's hands. I've wrestled, I've incapacitated people. We fought, punched, kicked. All those things have occurred. And at the end of that, I have to render aid to that guy. So during that guy just tried to take my life, that guy tried to stab me, shoot me, whatever he may have done. And I have to gain control of that guy. And let's hope it's not lethal force, that it's some other de-escalating technique, such as a taser or mace or arm bar or something like that, where you can get some control of somebody before it gets out of hand. When that de-escalation, that arrest is over, you have to render aid to that guy. So here's the guy, and that's hard to process. Most people get in a fight, they can't imagine the guy that just tried to kill me, I got to help him now.
Yeah.
And that's a lot to process. Even if it's been a shooting and you're wounded or you're hurt or your arm's dislocated or something like that from a fight and that guy's hurt, you have to render aid to him. And you got to do what you can do until, obviously if you're incapacitated yourself, you're not at a duty. But it's very hard to process that, because we're not supposed to hate. You're not supposed to be mad at somebody. It's supposed to be just a job thing. And that's the daily event. And if people could actually walk in our shoes in one day and times that by 24, or I work 42-day cycle, times 25 years, you could really, your eyes would just be wide open to a whole different perspective.
Scott, do you mind me asking you, when you see the videos that do come out, which are brutal, which, George Floyd, the Tamir Rice one, for example, for me was a little bit, I was like, wow, that happened fast. The Lando Castile one, where he was he was a legal gun owner and the officer shot him very quickly. There are these cases. I agree with you. They're not common, right? Because I can remember their names. I can remember these people's names, and these are dating back 10 years, all the way back to Oscar Grant in New York, which was a terrible one. But when you see these terrible tragedies, from your perspective, are you just like, man, like what goes on in your head when you see this? Are you worried about the ramifications when you see these type of things?
Sometimes it's easy for people to jump to conclusions, and I'm not justifying any of those cases, because each of those, I've only had the pleasure of seeing the background with BCI, which is our state Bureau of Criminal Investigation. I've only had the opportunity of seeing one of those cases, and the evidence needs to be investigated, because a lot of times, and I hate to say it, fake news and mainstream media will only show the portion of the clip that's dramatic. They won't show the part that's favorable to the officer or the part that's favorable to the citizen. They will only show that one excerpt that shows something horrible happening. So again, when you see partial videos or seeing things reposted or clips being edited, it's really hard to pass an opinion. Now, knowing the facts later is when you can form an opinion. And obviously with George Floyd, there isn't anybody in this country that's wearing a badge that has honor and integrity that agrees with what happened there. There isn't anybody. And if you do, you need to find a new job. What I don't understand is what happened in my mind as a critical incident guy, what led up to that? What caused him? Because it's in broad daylight. He's not trying to hide it. It's not, behind a car in an alley, in the back seat of a dark night somewhere. It's broad daylight in the middle of the street. So what happened to that officer that caused that to happen? Doesn't make it right, and he should be held accountable. But individually, he should be held accountable, not the profession. The individuals that were involved should be held accountable. Just like the individuals that commit a crime on every day of the street. I don't go arrest every black person, white person, Indian, gay person, lesbian person. I don't go do that just because a gay, lesbian, black, or white person committed a crime. And that's what happens here. They put us on trial because of that. And that's not true. Those individuals, like anybody else, should be held accountable. And what I look from my perspective is, did that guy have a history of violence? Shame on the department. Did he have use of force issues? Did he have,
Yeah.
And he did. So shame on the department, shame on his supervisors, and shame on those who overlook those things. But it isn't, like you said, everyday occurrence. Those are rare occurrences where somebody lost it. Maybe, like I was asking you earlier, maybe that guy just came from something horrific. Maybe he just had somebody spit in his face. Maybe he just had someone call him a name or say something about his wife or kids, or, I've had people threaten my family, things like that really would set you off if you were on the street, just, guy to guy. But you got to remember, you're in a position where you're sworn to take an oath and you have to behave differently. So maybe he was, but I'm not justifying anything that he may have done that day makes it okay. I'm just saying that those are the things that lead up to it. And like you said, without some sort of training, without some sort of debriefing or crisis intervention, those things can happen and will happen because we are human beings. And he's going to have to be accountable. He's going to have to atone not only to our Lord and Savior one day, but he's going to have to atone to his local city and federal laws that if they come of it, hate crime or something comes out of that. So I'm sorry for him and his department that have to go through that. They're going through misery. Just like after what happened in Ferguson, I met with the chief. Let me back up here a little bit. I've gone to DC for the National Police Memorial for the last 21 years. I've been on the honor guard and done everything from crisis intervention with the survivors at the host hotels to meeting the survivors at the airports and getting them on their buses, host hotels. And that means first year survivors to past year survivors. And I'm here to tell you that the thousands of officers that are on that wall are dying in the tune of hundreds every year. Some years, 150s, 250s. And there was a pitch there for a while to get below 100 was the thing going around the country, where you'd like to have 100 officers below 100 death, and it just hasn't happened. So when I go there and see the amount of stress and anxiety that this job creates, it makes you want to do better. It really does. And I want people to do better. That's why I want to be involved. So like I said, in my perspective, I've never run across anybody that's crossed the line, that's killed somebody because they were mad at their race or their ethnicity or the clothes they were wearing or things like that. But I do know cops were killed. I do know citizens have been killed for all those things. And what really irritates me as a policeman is that, and being a religious guy, and I believe in God, and I pray every night for not just my family and friends, but I pray for everybody in this country, in this world, is that we have a better understanding that when Jesus died on the cross, it was for all of us. He didn't pick which race he died for. It was for all of us. So we're all human beings on this same planet. And if we don't work together to make a difference, this planet's going to erupt and take itself back. And I mean that in whatever fashion, literally or figuratively as you want to take it, and whatever your belief is. And if we don't figure out a way to work together, because I know for a fact that cops, from my perspective, don't wake up each day and want to kill people. I know for a fact that all these people that are following these rhetorics are misinformed. Now, some of them are just damn pissed and damn angry, and they just want to create chaos, and they're looking for a reason to do it. But in that midst are people that are being sucked in, even in my own family, that are being sucked into this narrative that that's what police do every day. And I had a lady say people are being slaughtered in the streets by police.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
And I'm like, what city is that? Show me that. Because the national database that we all collect data from, that we all include data, you have to include your race, sex, and age whenever you have a disposition, whether it's a traffic ticket, a summons, or whatever you issue someone or take someone to jail. All those are collected, and that data does not show that. That data does not confirm any of those things that people want to believe. And a lot of that is misinformation. So I do want to get involved. And that's why I reached out to you, and my wife reached out to you, is I want to get involved. The narrative is wrong. And from a policeman's perspective, those tragedies are exactly that. They are horrible tragedies that occurred by one individual or two individuals, not the other 869,998 people, okay? That's not how we do our job. But on the flip side, there's more officers dying every year than people ever acknowledge. And that's a fact. Whereas the information that's being misrepresented is not factual. We're not killing people every day. In fact, I've only ever been in one officer-involved shooting where lethal force was used. The other ones were survived. So my perspective is it's the last thing. I remember going through a grand jury, and I remember crying like I'm probably going to now. But I remember how emotional that was, because you knew that you had did everything you could possibly do to not see that person die. But he gave you no choice, or you were going to die, and you were not going to go home to your wife and kids. And that's a horrible feeling, because there was nothing I could do about it. Everything I tried to do, and I thought I was pretty good at de-escalating, wasn't going to do any good that day, because that guy was so hopped up on drugs. The Pope himself could have stood there, he wouldn't have known it. Jesus Christ could have been there. So I remember testifying to that grand jury, and I remember saying, I'm sad. I know that kid was somebody's, son. And although he made bad decisions, he forced my hand that day. So I know that I got to deal with that the rest of my life. But I know that family has to deal with not being able to see their son, ever again. So that bothers you as a human being. And I tell people that, you're not alone in this crisis. And I reach out to other officers who are trying to play this off. But it is hard, it hurts, when people don't believe that you're out there really trying to do good, and that people accept that policemen are supposed to die. Oh, that's just a job they took. But if they have to hurt somebody or kill somebody, then it's unacceptable. It's okay for us to dodge bullets. It's okay for us to get hurt. It's okay for us to get killed. But if someone dies at the hand of the police, they obviously must be dirty. And that's not the case. And I remember that for the rest of my life, that I remember giving CPR to a guy that had been shot. I don't know this guy from Adam. And I'm doing everything I can to save this guy's life. And this guy doesn't make it. And I feel like I did something wrong. And it was one of those, just unrelated to the other topic, but that's the kind of things that officers see on a daily basis. And they're supposed to compose themselves and go right back out in an 8-hour shift and do it again. A lot of times in other agencies where, like New York and other big boroughs where you have thousands of officers, if you make an arrest or a collar or whatever you want to call it, depending on what part of the country you live in, that's your whole day. In Ohio and other country or other cities in this country, that's just one thing. That's a couple hours and you're on to the next. So it is a lot to process. And I go in and speak to people all the time. And I tell them that, from my perspective, it's a lot to process. It still bothers me. And do I go out and think that the next call, I could have to, lose my life or take somebody's life again? Yeah, because I don't want to go through that again. That's the last thing you want to do. But in the end, I got to protect the citizens, and I got to protect myself and my fellow officers. And that's a tough assignment. And some people have a hard time ever recovering from that. Just one incident, let alone having multiple in your career. So you take that 25-year course, and you ask me if there's policemen that are jaded and policemen that are pissed off, and there's policemen that become hard because of it. There is. And it's not by a fault of their own, because if you work in a big city and it's predominantly Hispanic or predominantly Black or predominantly Asian, and you work there for 10, 12 years and all you see day in and day out is those people, you tend to have a predisposed opinion that all Asians are Black, all are bad, all Blacks are bad, all Hispanics are bad, when really that's not true. So what needs to be done is people need to be pulled out of that environment. Their assignment needs to be changed so that they don't become jaded like that. And it's a tough thing to do, especially going undercover. If you put people undercover, you can't leave them in very long because they become that person. And if that's the case, then they're doing themselves harm and the job harm. So you got to pull them out. Same thing with these assignments. Officers need to be reassigned. They need to be relocated. We have shift beds every 6 months so that you could be on a different shift if you've had too much of a watch. Well, first shift, second shift, third shift, A, B, or C, whatever you call it. And you can be reassigned, and you can bid for another shift if you're getting burnt out. So it's getting recognized, and to our beginning conversation, it's getting understood that there are stressors that need to be addressed, and there are things that need to be addressed. And one of the things I really want to talk about the most is officer suicide. It is just absolutely out of control. And one of the things that I think is a tool to that is a lot of guys turn to alcohol. And obviously we know alcohol is a depressant. I don't drink, I don't smoke, so it's not a thing for me. But a lot of officers turn to that and become more and more, you know, sad and end up
More
taking their own life.
depressed. Yeah.
More depressed, obviously, because it's a depressant. And it doesn't matter. You know, one of the things that I think I'm blessed with is not just my faith in God, but my faith in humanity, is that I have a wonderful family. Both my in-laws, my wife, and my kids are all understanding. Sure, they worry for me, but they're understanding of the job, and they know that I don't bring it home. I'm able to do that, something I have the luxury of doing, that not everybody can process. But I leave my work at home, so I come home and have just me time with my family, and we operate off of what we know of each other, not what happens at my work. Now, there are times where I share things with my wife and kids. You know, some things are funny, and some things are sad that they don't need to know about. And my wife knows that I don't share everything with her, the tragedies. But what I think people need to understand most of all is that officers kill themselves because they feel like they've done something wrong. New officers will go kill themselves because they're worried to death. It's the worst feeling in the world if you're going to be judged by a grand jury, knowing that your life, your career, your reputation, everything's on the line for something that you thought you did 100% right. Sometimes it's a training issue, Elon. Sometimes it's inexperience. Sometimes it's bad habits where you become those people that we don't want officers to become, and you start doing those things that we all hate. And once that happens, I can't save those people. That's why I want to preach to the young officers. And I think we hired, excuse me, 13 or so in this last year. And of those officers, I want to reach out to them, let them know, start now, build your foundation now, so that you understand this job later. And we're reaching out to those young people that if you have never seen a dead body, never gone to an autopsy, never seen a child burn up in a car, never seen a person jump off a roof like at 9/11, seen those things were horrible. If you've never seen that stuff, it's hard to process.
Yeah.
When you go through a whole career and you've seen thousands of those things and you've done nothing along the way, that's going to be a lot to swallow and hold inside. And that's what's going to make you that jerk of a cop. So that's why we're reaching out to some of these young people and say, come talk to us, come sit down. It's totally, up to you. It's obviously, not mandatory unless you're involved in a shooting. You do have to go see a counselor.
Yeah, but it's all that stuff that will get people through it. It's all that stuff early on that's not currently looked at necessarily, that if you start dealing with officers very, very early in their career, you'll be able to build a foundation of them being able to deal with all these things that they see.
Teach them how to process things.
Yeah.
Because
if ignored, could lead to a George Floyd situation.
Sure. And I don't know what happened. And again, I'm not speaking of that officer's day or that officer's career because I don't know him personally. But it seems to me, just from a perspective of a veteran policeman, that would be such a stupid move in front of all those people, knowing that everybody today has a camera. Everybody today has a cell phone. Everybody else said there's video surveillance, CCTV everywhere. Everyone was out that day. It would seem to me that was a hate crime. That if that was based solely on the color of his skin, he says, I wanted to beat up this person because of that today, that would be a stupid move because there was hundreds of people there, not to mention all the other people that could have viewed it later on CCTV. So I don't know what went wrong that day because I wasn't there, but it's a hard pill for me to swallow that it had anything to do with race. But again, I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't even. The whole thing is weird, but I mean, that's just like you said. That's a specific situation, and I don't know if it's even. I mean, every cop I've talked to is very much against what happened to George Floyd.
Oh, he was out of line. There's no question, and that's what I had a lady that moved from Cleveland that came to our jurisdiction, and she said Cleveland was crazy, and I was up there one day for the riots, and they had destroyed buildings and graffiti and all that stuff, and I said, what does that do, other than cost the city money? And a lot of those stores and businesses that they looted or burned were Black or African-American owned businesses. I hate to say African-American because they are Black Americans. They're American just like I am. And unless they just recently had come from Africa, then maybe they are African-Americans. But to me, they're just another human being, but I call them Black males, white, Black females. But the idea was that she was so upset by what they were misrepresenting that she didn't want to be a part of it. Her Black kids and her Black husband talked with me for 25 minutes along the roadside to where my dispatch was checking on me, what the hell's going on. I had just made a traffic stop. And we were talking, and she was so glad to move out of the city of Cleveland because she didn't like the message, the narrative that was being spun. She's like, yes, there is racism. Yes, there is people that hate people. Since the beginning of time, there's been people, I'm looking for a drink, there's been people that have hated other people because they were raised that way. They were raised improperly. The lady was so polite, and it was just during the timing when COVID was a big deal, and then COVID wasn't a big deal if you were out protesting, but it was a big deal if you were on the other side of the politicians' opposing team. Then it was a big deal, and you were a jerk for doing it. But then when you went out to protest and destroy buildings and burn things, it was not a big deal. So that was ironic to me. But anyway, what she was mentioning was this whole COVID thing. She was mentioning this whole blame a cop, that it's always a cop. She goes, what about all the kids that die every day? If Black lives matter, then shouldn't every Black life matter when it's a Black person killing a Black person, when it's a 4-year-old getting killed in a shooting, when 30-some young kids die from gang-related violence in a city? I won't mention any names, but you probably know where it is. In a weekend, why aren't those things being addressed? Because if it's only Black lives matters when it's a white policeman, then Black lives aren't mattering. All Black lives should matter when they're dealt a blow of innocence being taken. So if a murder is a murder, then they should reclassify it as selective Black Lives Matter, because to me, it would be more important if you're trying to save your race from extinction, is what I heard from a lady on the internet the other day. If you're trying to save your race from extinction, then the other ones that are dying tenfold compared to the hands of the police, those are the ones.
It's 100-fold, actually. If you look at
100-fold.
the rate of unarmed compliant people, it's about 100-fold. It's
Those people should be the ones that you address if you're trying to prevent the extinction of your race. And that bothers me as a human being, because I have never looked at anyone other than a human being. And I'll sit next to you in church, I'll talk to you on the street, and to me, you're not a Black guy, you're another human being. You just happen to be Black. And what bothers me is when you get people that play that card, and they really do play that card. And I pulled people over where they played that card. You're pulling me over because I'm Black. No, I'm pulling you over because you're doing 107 on your motorcycle. I couldn't see with your helmet on what color you were, but nice try. So those are the things that really get you going, you know, that when they poke the bear sometimes, because that's not part of my wheelhouse is race. So to me, that bothers me. But the other thing that this lady was mentioning was that they were Black people and they were offended that people were speaking on behalf of them. That's not my narrative. So don't speak on behalf of me. And people like Morgan Freeman and a lot of famous Black actors, they get on there and they make comments that say, I'm tired of people speaking for me.
Do you want to mention anything? Do you want to, like you said, like you wanted to bring light to what you're doing? Is there any?
Yeah, I just, to every policeman, man or woman out there on the job, that if you notice somebody in your department, on your squad, in your division, wherever, that isn't the same or isn't acting right than what they normally are, inquire, let them know, reach out to somebody that has a community-based critical incident stress management crisis team. It doesn't have to be a dead body, it doesn't have to be a dead person. It could be everything from a horrible traffic accident to just stressed and overwhelmed. And if it affects his day-to-day, reach out to that officer and point him in the right direction and get him some help, because that's the only way we're going to end officer suicides in this country, is that we reach out to those officers that are in need. It's a lot easier to save a guy in the ocean that's drowning because you can see it abstractly. You can see here's a guy struggling and he's drowning. I need to throw him a life preserver. But when you're in your department full of alpha males and alpha females, it's sometimes tough to see who's struggling. So take a moment to know your crew, know your guys' shift, and reach out to those individuals that may be struggling so that it doesn't lead to one of those horrific ODMP, officer down pages, or notices that somebody was so sad they had to take their own life.
Good. Thank you, Scott.
No, hey, pleasure. And thank you for what you're doing. If I was there, I'd give you a big hug. I appreciate what you're doing. And it just even more overwhelms me with joy that somebody that comes from a background of you that doesn't always get a straight eye either. We hate all Middle Easterns because of one Middle Eastern, right? And your wife coming from a struggling area because all those people should be struggling with her, and she decided to get out of that and make it herself. Well, God bless her for that, and God bless you for what you're doing. And if your company benefits from what you're doing, then so be it. And if police officers benefit from hearing these messages of sincere policemen that are trying to make a change or bring about change from within, or getting officers help for one of our causes, then so be it. Well done.